October 3rd, 2024. Margaret Williams had been dead for 3 days when her 4 adult children finally gathered the courage to enter her modest 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit, Michigan. For 73 years, Margaret had lived frugally, some would say obsessively, collecting every penny she found, saving every coin that passed through her hands, and driving her family frustration with her extreme penny-pinching habits. Her children, Robert, 52, Linda, 49, James, 46, and Patricia, 43, had grown up embarrassed by their mother's behavior. Margaret would stop traffic to pick up a penny from the street, argue with cashiers over cent-by-cent price discrepancies, and fill every available container in her apartment with loose change that she refused to spend or deposit in the bank. "Mom, it's just a penny," they had said countless times throughout their lives. "Why are you so obsessed with collecting worthless coins?" Margaret would always smile mysteriously and respond, "Every penny has a purpose. You'll understand someday." But as Robert, Linda, James, and Patricia began cleaning out their mother's apartment, they discovered that Margaret's lifetime of penny saving had been hiding a secret so incredible that it would rewrite everything they thought they knew about their mother's financial sacrifice and unconditional love. What they found hidden throughout Margaret's modest apartment wasn't just loose change. It was a carefully orchestrated plan that had been 50 years in the making, funded entirely by pennies and small coins that most people throw away without a second thought. Margaret Williams had been saving pennies her entire adult life, but not for the reasons her children had assumed. The truth behind her obsessive penny collecting would either bring her family closer together or tear them apart with guilt over how they had treated the woman who had sacrificed everything for their future. Margaret Williams had earned her reputation as a penny lady throughout her Detroit neighborhood over 5 decades of obsessive coin collecting. She was a woman who would walk an extra block to avoid stepping over a penny on the sidewalk, who kept mason jars filled with sorted coins on every surface of her apartment, and who drove her children to embarrassment with her extreme frugality. Margaret had been a single mother since 1975, when her husband David died in an industrial accident, leaving her with 4 young children and no life insurance. At 28 years old, Margaret suddenly faced the responsibility of raising Robert, 8, Linda, 5, James, 3, and baby Patricia alone, with only her job as a school cafeteria worker to support the family. The early years were brutally difficult. Margaret worked double shifts whenever possible, took in laundry from neighbors to earn extra money, and stretched every dollar until it screamed. But it was never enough to provide the kind of life she wanted for her children. The kind of life where they could participate in school activities, have nice clothes, and dream about college instead of worrying about basic survival. That's when Margaret began her obsession with pennies. It started innocently enough. Margaret noticed how many coins people dropped or discarded without thinking. Pennies left on store counters when customers didn't want to carry them. Loose change forgotten in shopping carts. Coins dropped in parking lots and abandoned because they seemed too worthless to retrieve. If I collected every penny I see, Margaret thought, maybe those pennies could add up to something meaningful for my children. But Margaret's penny collection quickly evolved beyond casual coin finding. She began searching couch cushions in public places, checking payphone coin returns, and yes, stopping traffic to pick up pennies from busy streets. Her children were mortified by their mother's behavior, especially as they became teenagers and their friends began to notice. "Mom, you're embarrassing us," Linda would complain when Margaret stopped the family car to retrieve a penny from a crosswalk. "It's 1 cent. It's not worth anything." But Margaret was playing a much longer game than her children realized. Every penny she collected went into labeled mason jars that lined the shelves of her small apartment. She had jars marked Robert's college, Linda's dreams, James's future, and Patricia's education. She had jars for emergencies, for Christmas gifts, for school supplies, and for opportunities she couldn't yet imagine but wanted to be prepared for. Margaret's obsession became legendary in the neighborhood. Store owners began saving their penny customers left behind, knowing Margaret would stop by weekly to collect them. Bank tellers recognized her as a woman who came in monthly to exchange her carefully counted rolls of pennies for larger bills that went immediately into savings accounts. The children grew up thinking their mother was eccentric at best and mentally unstable at worst. They couldn't understand why a grown woman would spend hours sorting coins by year and mint mark, why she would walk miles out her way to visit coin-operated businesses where people might have dropped change, and why she seemed to value pennies more than her own dignity. Mom cares more about pennies than people, James complained to his siblings during his teenage years. She's more excited about finding a coin on the ground than she is about our report cards or basketball games. What the children didn't realize was that Margaret's penny obsession was her way of ensuring that their report cards and basketball games would always matter, that they would have opportunities she had never dreamed possible, and that their futures would be built on something more solid than hope and prayer. But penny by penny, jar by jar, decade by decade, Margaret Williams was constructing a miracle that none of her children could have imagined. Margaret's penny obsession had made her children ashamed of their mother for decades. But what they were about to discover in her apartment would prove that every embarrassing moment, every collected coin, and every sacrifice had been part of a plan so extraordinary that it would change their understanding of love forever. As Margaret's children grew into adults, their embarrassment about their mother's penny collecting transformed into frustration and genuine concern about her mental health. Even when they became successful in their own careers, Robert as an accountant, Linda as a nurse, James as a teacher, and Patricia as a social worker, they couldn't convince Margaret to change her obsessive behavior. "Mom, you don't need to do this anymore," Robert would argue during family visits. "We're all doing well financially. You could live more comfortably if you'd stop hoarding these worthless coins and actually spend some money on yourself." Margaret's apartment was indeed a testament to extreme frugality. She owned the same furniture she bought secondhand in the 1980s, wore clothes until they literally fell apart, and lived on a diet of generic groceries and home-cooked meals that cost less than $3 per day. Every available surface was covered with mason jars full of sorted coins, and every closet contained boxes of pennies organized by decade. But what frustrated her children most was Margaret's refusal to enjoy the fruits of their success. When Robert offered to pay for a vacation, Margaret declined, saying she needed to stay home to take care of her pennies. When Linda tried to buy her mother a new refrigerator, Margaret insisted her 30-year-old appliance worked fine. When James and Patricia pooled money to surprise Margaret with a new television, she returned it to the store and put the refund money into her coin-sorting operation. She's choosing pennies over relationships with her own children, Patricia complained to her siblings. "When was the last time Mom came to one of our houses for dinner? When was the last time she bought herself something nice? She's living like a homeless person while sitting on thousands of dollars worth of coins that she'll never spend." The family interventions became more frequent as Margaret aged. Her children worried that she was developing dementia or some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that was preventing her from enjoying her golden years. They suggested therapy, medical evaluations, and even considered legal intervention to force Margaret into assisted living where her finances could be managed by professionals. But Margaret remained mentally sharp and stubbornly independent. She continued working at the school cafeteria until she was 68 years old, not because she needed the income, but because she enjoyed the routine and the opportunity to collect coins from students who dropped change during lunch periods. "My pennies have a purpose," Margaret would insist whenever her children confronted her about her behavior. "Everything I'm doing is for you, even if you don't understand it yet." But her children had stopped believing that Margaret's penny collecting had anything to do with them. They assumed she was hoarding coins out of depression, mental illness, or an irrational fear of poverty that stemmed from her difficult years as a young widow. What they didn't know was that Margaret had been keeping meticulous records of every penny she collected, every jar she filled, and every plan she was funding through 5 decades of systematic coin accumulation. And the day they finally understood the scope of their mother's sacrifice would be the day they realized that love sometimes looks like obsession, and miracles sometimes come disguised as mental illness. Margaret's children thought they were cleaning out the apartment of a woman who had wasted her life collecting worthless coins. But the first discovery would prove that their mother's pennies were worth far more than they had ever imagined, and her obsession was far more organized than they had ever realized. The first shock came when Robert opened Margaret's bedroom closet and found not just random boxes of coins, but a sophisticated organizational system that looked more like a small business operation than a hoarding situation. Every box was labeled with dates, sources, and running totals written in Margaret's careful handwriting. Downtown Penny Hunt, March 1995. 247 pennies. Bank floor coins, December 2003, 156 coins total. Christmas shopping season finds, 2010, 892 pennies, 45 nickels, 23 dimes, 7 quarters. But more surprising than the organization was the scope. Margaret hadn't been randomly collecting loose change. She had been systematically harvesting coin from specific locations and events, tracking her finds with the precision of a professional archaeologist. Linda found Margaret's master ledger in a fireproof safe hidden behind the water heater. The ledger contained 50 years of daily entries documenting every coin Margaret had collected, where she had found it, and which project it had been allocated to support. The projects were even more detailed than the coin collection itself. Margaret had separate accounting systems for Robert's education fund, Linda's medical school support, James's teaching career, and Patricia's social work training. She had additional projects labeled emergency medical, Christmas magic, wedding gifts, and most mysteriously, the big surprise. James found the banking records that revealed the true scope of Margaret's penny empire. For 45 years, she had been making monthly deposits to multiple savings accounts, credit unions, and investment funds. The deposits started small, $23 in 1979, $41 in 1980, $67 in 1981, but grew steadily as Margaret's coin-collecting operation became more sophisticated and her organizational system more efficient. By the 1990s, Margaret was depositing between $200 and $400 per month, entirely from coins she had collected from public spaces, forgotten change, and systematic searches of areas where people frequently drop money. By the 2000s, her monthly deposits exceeded $500, and by 2020, Margaret was converting over $800 worth of coins into savings every single month. Patricia found the investment records that showed how Margaret had parlayed her penny collecting into a diverse portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The woman her children had believed was financially illiterate had actually been working with financial advisors since 1985, systematically investing her coin-derived income according to a long-term strategy designed to maximize growth over decades. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Hidden in Margaret's kitchen, inside a fake flour canister, Robert found a manila envelope marked for my children, to be opened only after my death. Inside the envelope were 4 letters addressed to each of her children individually, along with a master document that explained the full scope of what Margaret had accomplished through 5 decades of penny collecting. The master document began with words that would haunt her children forever. My dearest Robert, Linda, James, and Patricia, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you are finally learning the truth about why I spent my life saving pennies. I know you have been embarrassed by my behavior, frustrated by my choices, and worried about my mental health. But every penny I collected, every jar I filled, and every coin I saved was part of a plan to give you the lives you deserved, even when I couldn't afford to give them to you any other way. Margaret's letter would reveal that her penny collecting had generated more money than her children earned in their professional careers combined. But the financial totals would be less shocking than learning how she had used that money to secretly support their lives in ways they had never realized. The financial summary in Margaret's master document was staggering. Over 50 years of systematic penny collecting, combined with careful investing in compound interest, had generated a total accumulated wealth of $1.3 million. Margaret had collected an estimated 2.7 million pennies during her lifetime, along with hundreds of thousands of nickels, dimes, and quarters found in public places. But the raw coin collection represented only a fraction of her financial achievement. By investing her coin-derived income consistently over 5 decades, Margaret had built a portfolio that made her wealthier than any of her children had ever imagined possible. But the money was just the beginning of Margaret's revelation. The individual letters addressed to each child contained detailed accountings of how Margaret had secretly used her penny fortune to support their lives without their knowledge. Robert's letter revealed that Margaret had paid off his student loans anonymously through a scholarship program that was actually funded entirely by her coin collecting. She had also made the down payment on his first house through a fake bank promotion that was actually Margaret liquidating years of penny-derived investments. When Robert's wife needed expensive fertility treatments, the insurance company's mysterious full coverage decision had been Margaret paying the bills directly. Linda's letter disclosed that her medical school education had been completely funded by Margaret's penny collection. Linda believed she was receiving need-based financial aid, but Margaret had been anonymously donating to Linda's college specifically to trigger aid eligibility, while also directly paying tuition costs through multiple fake financial aid programs that Margaret had created and funded herself. James's letter explained that when his first teaching job was eliminated due to budget cuts, the mysterious benefactor who had paid his mortgage for 6 months while he searched for new employment had been Margaret using her coin collection fortune to prevent her son from losing his home. James had never learned the identity of his anonymous supporter, but Margaret had been tracking his financial struggles and intervening whenever necessary. Patricia's letter revealed that Margaret had secretly funded Patricia's graduate education in social work, her first car, and the legal fees when Patricia had gone through a difficult divorce. Patricia had believed she was receiving help from various charitable organizations and legal aid societies, but Margaret had been orchestrating and funding all of the assistance her daughter received. But beyond the individual financial support, Margaret's letters revealed something even more extraordinary. She had been using her penny collection to create experiences and opportunities for her children that they had attributed to luck, coincidence, or their own hard work. The scholarship that had sent Robert to summer camp for 3 years, funded by Pennies. The contest Linda had won that provided a family vacation to Disney World. Margaret had rigged the entire contest and paid for everything. The anonymous donor who had bought new sports equipment for James's high school basketball team when he was a coach. Margaret had been systematically supporting every organization and activity her children were involved in. Margaret had spent 50 years using her penny collection not just to build wealth, but to secretly orchestrate her children's lives in ways that gave them opportunities, solved their problems, and created positive experiences while allowing them to believe they were independent and self-sufficient. Margaret's children were devastated to realize that their successful lives had been secretly supported by the mother they had been ashamed of for decades. But the final revelation in Margaret's letters would prove that her penny collecting had been funding something even more extraordinary than their individual dreams. The most heartbreaking revelation in Margaret's letters was her detailed accounting of how her children's embarrassment about her penny collecting had affected her emotionally, and how she had used those painful experiences as motivation to work even harder at her coin collection mission. Robert, I remember when you were 16 and refused to let me pick you up from school because your friends had seen me collecting coins from the parking lot. That night, I cried for 2 hours, but then I counted the 43 pennies I had found that day and reminded myself that each of those pennies would eventually help pay for your college education. Your embarrassment hurt my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve to make sure you would never be embarrassed by lack of opportunities. Linda, when you told your college roommate that your mother was mentally ill because I collected pennies, I overheard you during your phone conversation. I went in my room and looked at the jar labeled Linda's Medical School Fund, which contained $347 in pennies at the time, and I promised those pennies that I would prove my love for you was not mental illness. It was the most rational thing I had ever done. James, during your wedding planning, when you asked me not to mention my penny collecting to your future in-laws because it was embarrassing to the family, I understood your concerns. But I also went home that night and deposited $1,200 worth of coins I had been saving specifically for your wedding gift. I gave you the money as a small contribution from your mother, but it represented 2 years of systematic penny collecting from every source I could find. Patricia, when your daughter asked me why I was so weird about money and you told her that Grandma has some problems that make her act strange, I heard everything you said, but instead of being angry, I took Emma to bank with me the next day and showed her how Grandma's weird pennies were actually going into a college fund that would pay for her education someday. Emma understood what you couldn't. That love sometimes looks different than we expect. But Margaret's letters saved the most extraordinary revelation for last. The project she had labeled The Big Surprise wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. Margaret had used her penny collection to purchase and fully pay off a 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood across town. The house had been bought in 1998 for $89,000, entirely funded by 15 years of penny collecting, and had been carefully maintained and improved over the subsequent 26 years using continued coin collection income. The house was now worth approximately $340,000 and was completely debt-free. But Margaret hadn't bought the house as an investment. She had bought it as a family headquarters where children and grandchildren could gather for holidays, celebrations, and family milestones for generations to come. The deed to 1247 Maple Street is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with keys to the house and instructions for the caretaking service that has been maintaining it for the past 5 years, while I waited for the right time to reveal the surprise. The house is completely paid for, beautifully furnished, and ready to become the center of our family's life together. I know you will want to sell the house and divide the money between you, but before you make that decision, I hope you will spend one Christmas there together and remember what it felt like to be a family who took care of each other instead of 4 adults who were embarrassed by their mother's penny collection. Margaret's final letter contained instructions that would force her children to confront not just the magnitude of her financial sacrifice, but the emotional cost of their lifetime of shame about the mother who had been secretly supporting their dreams with pennies they thought were worthless. Margaret's final letter was addressed to all 4 children collectively and contained the most devastating revelation of all. My dear children, I have one more confession to make, and it is the hardest truth I have ever written down. For the past 10 years, I have been living with cancer. I could have afforded excellent medical treatment with the money I accumulated from my penny collection, but I chose to use that money to continue supporting your lives instead of extending my own. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014, I had approximately $800,000 in savings from my lifetime of penny collecting. I could have used that money for experimental treatments, private doctors, and the kind of medical care that might have given me many more years with you. Instead, I chose to continue using my penny fortune to pay for Robert's children's private school tuition, Linda's husband's business loan, James's daughter's wedding, and Patricia's son's car when he started college. I made the choice to die earlier, but die knowing that my penny collection had given my family everything I had always dreamed of providing for you. I chose to leave you wealthy and successful rather than live longer and leave you with medical debt and financial stress. I need you to understand that my penny collecting was never about the money. It was about proving that a mother's love could overcome any financial limitation. Every embarrassing moment you endured because of my weird behavior was actually a moment when I was choosing your future over my own pride. Every penny I collected was a prayer that you would someday understand that love sometimes looks like obsession, and miracles sometimes come disguised as mental illness. The final paragraph of Margaret's letter contained instructions that would change her children's understanding of their mother's life forever. I have left each of you financially secure, but more importantly, I have left you with the knowledge that you were loved completely by someone who was willing to appear foolish, embarrassing, and mentally unstable in order to give you everything you needed to succeed. I collected pennies for 50 years not because I was obsessed with money, but because I was obsessed with you. The mason jars full of coins that remain in my apartment are not my final gift to you. They are a reminder that the smallest acts of love, accumulated over time, can create miracles. Please keep 1 jar each, and whenever you doubt that someone loved you completely, remember the woman who spent her life collecting pennies because she loved you more than her own dignity. The Williams family spent 3 days in Margaret's apartment, reading and rereading their mother's letters, while surrounded by the physical evidence of her 50-year penny-collecting operation. The woman they had thought was mentally ill had actually been the most organized and financially sophisticated person any of them had ever known. But more devastating than the financial revelations was the emotional reckoning. For decades, Margaret's children had been embarrassed by their mother's behavior, frustrated by her choices, and convinced that she was choosing pennies over relationships with her family. Now, they understood that every moment of embarrassment had been a moment when Margaret was sacrificing her own dignity to secure their futures. Every penny she had collected while they watched in shame had been collected specifically for them. Every jar they had mocked had been labeled with their names and dreams. Robert found Margaret's medical records in her bedroom, confirming that she had indeed been living with cancer for 10 years while continuing to collect pennies and support her family's financial needs. The records showed that Margaret had refused expensive treatments that might have extended her life, choosing instead to direct her resources toward her children's ongoing expenses. Linda discovered Margaret's correspondence with financial advisors, revealing that their mother had been working with investment professionals since the 1980s to maximize the returns on her coin-collecting income. The woman they had thought was financially naive had actually been receiving quarterly portfolio reports and making sophisticated investment decisions for decades. James found notebooks filled with Margaret's research about his teaching career, his children's educational needs, and his family's financial challenges. She had been monitoring his professional life and intervening anonymously whenever he faced difficulties, using her penny collection to solve problems he never knew she was aware of. Patricia uncovered evidence that Margaret had been funding charitable organizations that her daughter worked with as a social worker, specifically to ensure that Patricia's clients received better services. Margaret had been using her penny fortune to improve the lives of people she had never met, simply because they were important to Patricia's professional mission. But the most shocking discovery came when the family visited the house Margaret had bought with her penny collection. 1247 Maple Street was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a large dining room table set for 8 people, bedrooms prepared for visiting grandchildren, and a kitchen stocked with Margaret's favorite recipes and family photos spanning 5 decades. Margaret had created a family headquarters funded entirely by pennies collected from parking lots, sidewalks, and forgotten change, then maintained it for years, while waiting for the right moment to surprise her family with the gift of a permanent gathering place. On Christmas Eve 2024, exactly 2 months after Margaret's death, Robert, Linda, James, and Patricia gathered with their spouses and children for dinner at 1247 Maple Street. The dining room table was set with Margaret's grandmother's china, and in the center of the table sat 4 mason jars, one for each child, filled with the final pennies from Margaret's collection. Before the meal, Robert stood to make a toast that captured what they had all learned about their mother's extraordinary life. For 50 years, we thought Mom was obsessed with pennies, but we were wrong. Mom was obsessed with us. Every penny she collected, every coin she saved, and every moment she spent building her fortune was an act of love so profound that we couldn't recognize it until she was gone. We were embarrassed by a woman who was actually creating miracles through sheer determination and unconditional love. We thought she was choosing pennies over people, but she was actually choosing our futures over her own comfort. The Williams family now manages the Margaret Williams Foundation, funded by their mother's penny collection, and dedicated to helping single mothers achieve financial stability through micro-investing and systematic saving programs. They teach workshops about how small amounts of money, accumulated consistently over time, can create life-changing opportunities for families facing financial challenges. But more importantly, they keep Margaret's mason jars prominently displayed in their homes as reminders that love sometimes comes disguised as behavior we don't understand, and the greatest gifts are often given by people who are willing to appear foolish in order to give us everything we need to succeed. Margaret Williams spent her life collecting pennies that most people threw away, and in doing so, she proved that the value of love cannot be measured in dollars and cents. It can only be measured in the extraordinary lengths someone will go to secure the happiness of the people they love most. Every penny does have a purpose. Margaret's children finally understand.